intro and see how we go.
Yeah, evening everyone. We've got a very special guest tonight, and I would like to say a dear brother and friend of mine from over from Aotearoa, Mr Ollie Dale. Ollie is one of the coolest human beings I know, and he's also one of the most progressive and innovative people I know in the industry, in that he's sort of really pretty good at keeping up on the front end curve of things. And when I think about sort of where I'm at as a photographer, even as a landscape photographer, but wider, there's a lot of pressure I find professionally to move into drone, to move into film, to move into content creation. And I'm sort of dragging my feet on the back end there. And Ollie's the kind of person I've been watching up close and from afar, who sort of went flying in from the front end and was reaping rewards from early on with that kind of progression. And Ollie's sort of more of a probably commercial photographer. He does some landscape work, but it's I couldn't think of anyone in terms of that kind of combination of topics that would have the level of expertise and charm and wherewithal to and willingness to share with us. So Luke and I were mucking around with some video this week and sort of trying to upskill ourselves. I've been tapping away in the background with drone work, trying to upskill myself a little bit, but I'm still sort of not quite there to, put my hand up on a commercial job and going, yeah, no worries. Luke and I tied a job together recently where he did the commercial drone work and I did the stills. So I'm sort of heading in that direction. But at the same time, I feel like I've got a lot to learn from someone like Ollie, and I've sort of been a bit shy to ask him questions over the years, but I'm going to grill him to bits tonight. So Ollie, actually, when they in New Zealand, when they first recognized, I guess, professionally the importance of video and stills, they created what's called a fusion category in the New Zealand Professional Photography Awards, and Ollie won all three in a row. Like, kind of untouchable because he was sort of ahead of the curve, I think. He then sort of put his hand up as a crazy man to be the New Zealand president for the NZIPP for a period of time. Hats off to anyone who's that. He's also a wonderful family man and a bit of a stalwart for the community and photography nationwide and New Zealand. And he's also lucked into a pretty amazing contract. A lot of people are jealous of, which he can probably tell you about. Involving lots of trips to airport and plane. Enough from me, Ollie. I'll let you sort of tell it about yourself, my friend.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the intro, and a special hello to Steve Scalone. Nice to see you, mate. I haven't seen you for a while. Sorry if I'm a bit choppy because as Paul was doing the intro, it was breaking up a bit. So maybe it's the internet underneath the Tasman or something. Not quite sure, but apologies if I break up. And also just wanted to correct you there, Mr. Paul. Australia actually came up with the fusion category first, and we copied you.
Ah, did they? Yeah, right.
So I think maybe 2011 you guys might have done it, or 2012. Anyway, you're about a year ahead of us. We liked what you guys did, so we tried it as well. But sadly, in New Zealand, we just didn't get enough people who saw video as an opportunity and jumped in. And so we only had sort of 6 to 10 entries every year. And every year it was me and a whole bunch of new people. So no one really kind of followed through all 3 years. But I was pretty passionate about it. And it's proved to be true because now it's what I love doing is video. I'll do the stills, of course, but video is by far my passion. It's so much fun. I love storytelling with video. So it's really cool. And thanks for having me on.
So Ollie, where did that sort of transition begin? I mean, if we go back a step, and I'm assuming you started as a stills photographer. I mean, did you see something? What sort of excited you? What sort of lit the fire? What was the tipping point to applying it as a commercial kind of thing as well?
Yeah, so I started photography in 2003, and then I set up my business in 2005, and literally just made business cards and said I'm a photographer, introduced myself, and started working. But it was the video put out for the launch of the Canon 5D Mark II that Vincent Laforet shot for Canon. And it was this whole big thing about DSLRs now had video. And I remember seeing that video just going, wow, that looks so cool. It was that depth of field that we're used to with an f2.8 lens. But you could never get that on a film camera, like on a video camera, because the sensors were always so small, or if you're using that tiny little tape, that you never got that depth of field. And that's really what piqued my interest, was that beautiful depth of field storytelling in motion. And it just kind of opened my eyes to a whole new world. And it's literally Pandora's box when you start learning video, because you're talking, a moment in photography can be measured in 1,000th of a second, whereas a moment in video is quite often measured in minutes. And therefore you've got to worry about what the sun does over a long period of time, not what it's doing right now. And then you've got to worry about sound, and you've got to worry about just everything coming together like that. And the motion of the camera, you know, we try and not have camera shake when we take stills, but actually moving the camera is a beautiful thing when you're taking video. So it's just, it really is a mind melting moment when you suddenly realize there's so much more to learn, but it's really fun.
That's awesome. And I guess also when you get into...
So when did you
get into video, the equipment list and everything like that really increases quite a lot as well, in terms of what you need to execute the different scenes that you're capturing.
Yeah, I've kind of gone one way and then back the other. One of the things I'm doing on the side now is a family video business, well, a family video product called Echo Films, and the idea is that it's a DSLR on a stabilizer with a 50mm lens, and that's it, on camera microphone with a windsock, just in case the family or the kids or someone says or does something that's worth recording the audio. And I try and keep it as simple as possible, and then I just hang out with the family for a few hours, and it's really fun and it's really powerful, and the families love it, which is, again, you know, imbibing energy into me, because the people I'm working with are getting so excited about it. But on my journey to that simple setup, I've gone all the other way to having a pretty serious Sony video camera, to having a drone that's probably cost me about $14,000 to buy all the bits that I need, and the Kiwi dollars, so about $5 Australian. And it's just like, you've got gimbals and you've got lighting, and you've got you know, stabilizers, and it's just, oh my goodness, LED lights. So yeah, it is very much a step up from, you know, turning up to a job with a camera in a hand and a couple of lenses in your backpack. This, you know, you can have a van load of gear just to get a very short piece of video. So yeah, it is definitely a change, but that's what I really enjoy, is that it's more of a challenge as well. So it's good.
Awesome.
Did you get, when did you kind of see that avenue of forward thinking about applying yourself in that regard, in terms of stills and video? Like where was the commercial kind of motivation that you saw in the marketplace? Did you get in there before it was there, or did you naturally sort of follow on the front end, or
I think it's always,
how did you sort of decide to...
I think it's always been there, the opportunity to make money out of video. It's just that used to be filled by videographers, and photographers were just a completely different league. What I saw in that moment of seeing a stills camera capturing video was the ability for me to actually join in with those people. And it's I don't know what it's like in Australia, but in New Zealand, the film industry is really cliquey. And it's really hard to break in. If you really want to make it in the film industry, you have to go to film school, and then you come out of film school with your peers, and you as a group go off and make a crew or two crews, and suddenly you start getting jobs together, and so you've literally got to start at the ground and work up. Whereas I came across from photography, I kind of just turned up one day with my DSLR and went, "Look, I've got a video button, can I join in?" And they all just turned around and walked away. And it's not that easy to break into the film industry. However, there are options and opportunities within what I do as a photographer for my clients that are more like, especially now with what's happened this year around the world, people are getting bored with static websites. People used to go onto Facebook and write text, and then they learned that they could put up photos. And so people would scroll past the text to get to the photos. And this is like 2008, of course. But you know, you used to scroll past through the blogs. Blogs are boring now. We go to Facebook and we look at photos. And now people scroll past the photos to get to the videos, and they sit there consuming videos on Snapchat and TikTok and all these other silly platforms. And it's all about the video. So if you really want to know what the future trends are, look at what the kids are doing, and it's all video. And so people with completely static websites are going to start losing out to people who actually start involving the viewer with video, whether it's video testimonials or just shooting what the product is or what the client does, what the service is. And you want to go to that website and come away quickly with as much information as you can. And the only way of really doing that is with video. So I'm an early adopter. I tend to fund projects on Kickstarter because I think that's a really cool thing to do. And I want to get there first. So I did try to buy as a 5D Mark II as soon as I could afford one. I don't know, what was I shooting before that? It might have been like a 40D or something like that. So it was pretty lackluster when you look back on it. But the 5D range has been wonderful, and I shoot on Mark IVs at the moment in the touch screen and the autofocus in video. It's just a beautiful machine. But you can use what you know with photography. You can bring that to a client and just tell a story with 30 seconds worth of video as well, and just work up from there.
Have you been tempted to go to the R5 at all?
No, because like awesome. But the problem with that new technology is that the old lenses, yes, they give you an adapter, but they're not really made for these fancy, super high resolution sensors. The reason they brought out these new lenses is because they need to be better quality to really get the most out of your sensor. And so if I'm going to be spending up large on a whole new kit of lenses, then that opens the world up to, well, do I go to Sony or do I go to Olympus? Or, so it's one of those things where I think Canon it's about time, and it's great to see them pushing the boundaries, but it does loosen me a little bit from the chains of, well, I bought Canon lenses, therefore I always have to shoot Canon bodies. It really does open up to the world of, well, what next for me? And that's why I have a Sony video camera for the stuff that the 5D Mark IV can't do. I've got a couple of different versions of video cameras, but they're, the first one I bought was 12 grand, and that was in 2013. And the one I bought this year, just before lockdown, was 26 grand. So, you start to really have to shell out for kit, but the end result is pretty amazing. I just was unlucky enough to fall into a hole this year and haven't really used that camera. It's a very big dust collector, expensive dust collector.
Is that like an FX9 or something like that?
That's the one.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Fantastic.
Yeah. Beautiful camera.
Yeah.
So where's that line between what, say, a 5D4 is capable of doing and what you would need to apply on your other systems?
Well, the 5D4 does a lot, and the small form factor is good. The reason I got the other camera was actually more because of the fact that the industry, when they're shooting video, they tend to shoot on Sony cameras. So either the one I had before was the FS700, and that was amazing because it does 200 frames per second. And you can, with add-ons and upgrades, get a raw video out of that. So you're dealing with huge dynamic range and all the rest of it. I then did not upgrade to the two cameras that came after that, which was the FS7 and the FS7 Mark II. And then I felt like it was about time if I really wanted to play with the big boys. Last year I did a few jobs for a petrol station chain over here in New Zealand and for an energy provider. And they were starting to ask for that type of camera. And so I just kind of thought it was about time to take the plunge to just play with the big boys and get those TV commercial type jobs by having this bigger camera. And then COVID hit, so it's sitting there doing nothing at the moment. So I have to rethink that. But at the same time, it is a beautiful camera, and I have used it on commercial shoots for video, and it just looks amazing. So it's kind of up to me as to when I want to use it and whether or not the client's paying enough for me to use the big camera. But the right camera for the right job, and you can use these sort of little sort of action cameras, and they have a place as well. They're not all that expensive, and the quality isn't all that great, but for the shots that you need, you can actually use them and get a decent enough quality. So there's a time and a place for a DSLR and a time and a place for a big shoulder mounted Sony camera that makes you wish you had never bought
it. big book stopper at the moment, Ollie. But well, you're going to have it for a while. Is it kind of is dynamic range one of the big factors?
Yeah,
between that system and the 5D
have
sort
a
of system?
fantastic dynamic range. They 14 or 16 stops they claim. I've never really proved it one way or the other, but the fact that I had a Sony camera already, so that the pictures are in the same ballpark when it comes to if I'm using two cameras at once. I also use a piece of software that can make one look like the other, so that's really useful. But it really is the Sony video. The step up from my camera is called the Sony Venice, and that is a fantastic camera they use in Hollywood, and it's kind of the step down from the Arri Alexa style camera. So the Arris, you can spend somewhere $60,000 to $100,000 on one of them. The Venice is probably around the 40 to 60 range, and then mine's in at the 20 something. So there's definite jumps up the quality grade, but actually the video camera that I've got will do 98% of what the Venice does. So, you know, it's just one of those things where, again, I was an early adopter. I wanted to grab that camera while I could because I'd missed the previous two, and it was just bad timing. But it's setting me up for the ability to shoot TV commercials, and clients like that will demand a certain style of camera. If I turn up with a Canon 5D Mark IV, they'll just never call me again. So there's a little bit.
So going back a little bit of a step, because most of our audience will be more that kind of user and looking and interested in thinking about how they can maybe apply that fusion approach more than they have. Where would you say the parameters are that those systems really accept, or well, how would you sort of book somebody, encouraging them to start exploring what it can do from a video perspective?
Sure. I'll tell you what I'll do. I don't have it open, but I'll open it now. I'll show you a video I shot very recently using a 5D Mark IV. It was on a stabilizer. So the Canon's terrible at image stabilization. The Sonys get them built in, and other systems have various versions of it. Canon pretty much go, well, we don't want to pay for the rights to that technology, so we're just not going to do it. And I'll just turn this down so you don't have to listen to too much volume. But I'll show you what the storytelling I got with it. And this is just a DSLR and a 50mm lens. There was one shot where I shifted to a wide angle. But this video is part of the Echo Films brand. And this is just me. The best part about it is I shoot it at 50 frames per second, which allows me to play it back at 25 frames, which is basically slow motion. And that just allows, I'm sorry, I did off that. It just allows you the ability to enjoy moments, especially with kids, where you can actually just slow down a little bit and sort of engage in a moment. It doesn't go past so quickly. She's very cute.
Use a gimbal for a lot of the sort of follow footage?
Yeah, the whole shoot I shot on a gimbal. It was a Ronin S.
Okay.
Popsy's birthday's today. Popsy's birthday's today.
And in these sort of scenes, when I just ask the kids questions, I just put it down on a table and leave it. And the battery lasts all day. It's a beautiful machine, and it just it's basically a tripod that I can run with.
Yep. Yeah, I just got the Ronin SC and had a lot of fun playing with that. I don't know if it was the best move given that it's made for more lighter weight setups, but it is nice for a sort of run and gun sort of thing. So and travel and that. So yeah, definitely good little tool to have.
Yeah, and it'll take a DSLR with a smallish lens. My 50mm is Sigma, so it's quite heavy. But you can get the sort of pancake style Canon 50mm lens at a f1.4, I think, and that's beautiful. Like, it's a great lens. It might be a bit noisy on the autofocus, so your camera will pick that up. So I really recommend it on a hot shoe mounted, cold shoe mounted microphone that you just plug in the side, because you get less of the camera noise of you holding the grip or changing the lens. Or
Yep.
But this sort of storytelling, the family absolutely love it, because it was Granddad's birthday and I just hung out with them for, what was it, 2.5 hours? And they now have like this 7-minute video of the kids and playing around and Granddad and this is really easy to do. You just literally turn it to video mode and stick it on AV and whatever, and just push record and off you go. Like it doesn't need to be technically difficult. This bit was difficult, running backwards, trying not to trip over. And there's a really cool bit coming up where they're sort of wrestling on the ground because they're trying to take the ball off each other, and it is just magic, you know. That little slow motion just allows you to just be there in the moment a little bit longer. And I'm really not doing anything tricky. It's a 50mm, it's on autofocus. It is a little bit tricky sometimes to wait for the camera to catch up. I don't recommend manual focus, especially using a gimbal. It just starts wobbling all over the place. Unless you want to just leave it on manual and move the camera into and out of the plane. But there's a shot here shortly that if it wasn't for autofocus, I could never have got it. And even just tracking her, she just didn't want to be filmed, but she looks beautiful, so I just turned down the bit where she says, don't film me. This bit here, watch this. There's no way you could do that without wobbling the camera all over the place, you know? And so it's a great effect. And, you know, throughout the video, they're playing outside, and then they start making cards for Granddad, and then the adults are having drinks and the kids are talking, and then there's this great scene where they all pile on the couch and give Granddad, try and pull his hairs out because he's obviously got too many. And you know, it's just a cool little moment. This is the one shot I did on the wide angle, but it's still on the gimbal. I just changed it because I wanted to get everyone in. So, you know, that's the kind of storytelling you can do. It's literally just family videos, but it's a professional style, because you're bringing that element of storytelling and technique to what we do as photographers, and you just turn it over to video mode and have a big memory card.
So I guess for me, one of the aspects I think that stands out for me with that is most of us, when we're trying out something new, when we've got a new technique, we'll try it out at a family first. You know, it's kind of the perfect avenue for exploring video or playing around with something that doesn't have a commercial application, or because you know, I mean, I've certainly done that. You know, you grab your models at home and the people around to experiment with, and I guess if people are going to sort of look at making that transition, then, you know, making something like that's probably a perfect sort of training ground in terms of getting used to motion and how to look at doing things smoothly. It starting to wrap their head around, I guess, some of the technical aspects, like maybe you could just sort of set the scene a little bit, Ollie, with say a 5D4, what you know, what shutter speed, you know, what kind of basic kind of movement based approach you do, how much you trust the autofocus, how much you don't, just to get a sense of where to sort of get started. I've just got someone at the door. I'm going to say g'day.
So the basic setup, there was a push right at the beginning of when you started learning video on DSLRs, and that was to have, you always shoot it at 25, or if you're in the States, 29.97, because they like to make everything as difficult as possible. But 25 frames per second is what Australia, New Zealand, England, pretty much most of the world will use the PAL system at 25. It's really useful because you can double it to 50 or quadruple it to 100. They're really easy steps to remember, but when you start multiplying 29.97 times 8, you're sort of, it's just too much maths. So it's really easy to keep it in the PAL system. And the rule was, you really want to have, because you've got 25 frames per second, you want to have your shutter speed at 1/50th of a second, so that as the frame is captured over 1/50th of a second, you've then got another 50th of a second for the camera to write that frame into the memory, and then you start capturing the next one. But that capture is long enough for motion. So if you think of shooting something at a 50th of a second, you know, if someone's running past you, they're going to be quite blurry. So it adds a little bit of smoothness to your frames, so that the frames feel like they're blending together. If you stick it on an 8,000th of a second and start taking video, it looks quite choppy, quite staccato, and it's kind of weird to look at. And unless you know what's causing it, you'll just look at it and go, oh, I don't know what's wrong with this video, but it feels a bit weird. And it's literally that smoothness. But having said that, and having done that for 6 or 7 years, I've now got to the point where I actually don't care anymore. It really doesn't make a huge difference. It's a nice effect, and if you want to make your videos smoother, then, you know, slow it down to a 50th. But now I don't worry about neutral density filters, because you also probably want the f2.8 end of the lens, f5, 6, whatever, because you want that depth of field look, because otherwise you might as well use any video camera. And so if you've got your aperture wide open and you're shooting at a 50th of a second, you need a neutral density on the end, because, you know, the sun's quite bright. Now I don't even worry about shutter speed anymore. I just set it on aperture priority, and away you go. It really doesn't make enough of a difference. The purists will notice it, but the families and the corporate clients and the people watching YouTube, once you upload a video to Facebook, it looks about 1/10 the value of what it started anyway. So we worry too much, I think, about perfectionism sometimes. But you probably want to, you can't go any lower than a 50th of a second. It starts getting a bit crazy, unless you're filming someone in front of a TV screen, and that's flicking it at 50 hertz. And so if you're not quite in sync, it'll just have this horrible flicker. So then you want to open it to like a 40th or a 30th, just to allow the TV to burn its image in between all of your frames. But really, it's stick it on video mode and go, because you really can't get it wrong. If you balance your light, you've got whatever you need in focus. Every camera is different. Some of them will autofocus, some of them won't. It is a challenge, but it's actually quite beautiful to shoot in manual focus. So it's again, what I did was I bought the 5D Mark II and I just started playing, and I've been playing ever since. And sadly, that also involves investing money, because I'm never happy. But at the same time, I really enjoy that storytelling and the challenge that video has brought.
So can you flesh that out a little bit more, Ollie, like what it can do more than, say, you know, a photo documentary series alone can do?
Well, I mean, if you look at the jobs that I've done, we'll talk about later this job I did where I was flown up to Truk Lagoon in Micronesia for a week-long shoot with a guy hunting a plane that went missing in 1938. So that's at the extreme of cool factor. At the other end, I've been asked to fly my drone for a TV commercial. I've been asked to use my video camera to create a TV commercial, but only for web. I've used my DSLR to shoot time lapses that I've turned into video. And so it's all over the place. And that's what I really enjoy about what I do, is that it's not one specific thing. I'm not a wedding photographer. I'm not a person who photographs green cars. I am this guy who can go out and you give me a challenge, and that's my biggest joy, is by taking your brief and telling a story. So I guess when you're starting out with video, you want to flick it over to the video mode and start shooting, but then you actually want to challenge yourself to tell a story. And when I used to do online tutorials for video, one of the things I would do is challenge my students to film themselves making toast, because it's something we all know how to do, and it's something that is different for everyone, because we've all got different toasters and different layouts in our kitchen and different light sources, but everyone knows what toast is. And so then it's more about, how do I tell that story? And that's really the challenge you want to take yourself. When you photograph an event, or if you're photographing even just something for yourself, sometimes if you're doing a series of photographs, you want that series to take the viewer on a journey and take them somewhere. And so you're doing the same thing with video. What's the beginning? What's the middle? What's the end? What's the transition? What is the story? Do I leave you with questions? You know, and it really is that Pandora's box of, wow, there's so much more to this. But in doing this and learning about this, I suddenly have a much greater respect for movie making. And now when I see movies, I just saw a movie the other day, it's a few years old now, but Baby Driver. And it's a gangster movie, but it was shot by the guy spending 5 years developing a musical score. So he went and listened to all the music he wanted to bring into it. And he wrote the movie to fit the music, to the point where the second scene is like a 3-minute one take scene where everything in the scene happens to the beat of the music. It's absolutely incredible. But without my foray into learning filmmaking, I probably wouldn't have noticed it. And so there is that payback when you start learning this style of storytelling, that you actually start seeing it all around you, which is really fun.
Yeah, I've had some people suggest that once you start moving into the video sort of realm, to actually take the time to look at movies, because their understanding of light and motion and positioning and storytelling, it's one thing to be entertained, it's another to look behind how something's created and why and what techniques they've used. And I think that's another avenue worth exploring or suggesting. I don't know if you've got any particular ones in mind that jump out.
What I recommend is that you go onto YouTube and you find people who have done video essays on a video or a scene or something in particular, because the people who have studied film, there's some really fantastic essays where they are dictating basically into their video, but they're showing you at the same time. And any movie that and this is why I say look up your own one, because you'll have your own particular styles. Again, Baby Driver, apart from the bad language, for those who don't like swearing, it's a fantastic movie. So I actually edited the bad language out so we could show my kids. But there are several essays on that movie, and it's a particular movie where it's different to a lot of other movies because of how it was made, and therefore it's worth watching a 10-minute dissertation by someone who knows film, because even just listening to them talk about it makes you start learning, there's other ways of looking at this that I'd never even considered. Camera angle, timing, what's in focus and when. Some of these things are so subtle that we just don't even see them. And yet once you start learning, you realize how beautiful a good movie is. And literally the 3 movies I watched after that, I was so disappointed because none of them were anywhere near as clever as that one.
So I was thinking, what are the kind of obvious sort of traps and pitfalls that you might be able to help people avoid a little bit when you start sort of getting yourself into it?
Probably start with your camera on a tripod, because you won't realize how shaky a DSLR or a compact camera is, and unless you've got something beautiful like a Sony, but especially the Canons, it's just almost impossible to watch. So stick your camera on a tripod and start playing with, do what you would normally do. Grab a subject or go to a landscape or whatever, shoot it the way you would shoot it as a photographer, but just do it in video mode and pre-roll and post-roll. So if you're going to get your niece or nephew to jump up in front of the camera, push record, lights, camera, action. Camera comes before action because you want the camera rolling so that when the action happens, you can edit around it. The biggest mistake I made when I first started was pushing the button as I wanted something and stopping it as I wanted to finish. And actually, when it comes time to edit, you've got no breathing room. There's no way of transitioning from one shot to another. So shoot at the beginning and then let your action happen, and then wait at the end. When I do interviews with someone, I tell them at the beginning, I'm going to ask you a question and I want you to give me your answer. At the end, I'm going to say nothing, and I just want you to be comfortable with that because I need time to be able to cut around what you say. And people can spoil an interview by simply finishing the interview and looking away. And you're like, I need that room. So we've got to do that shot again. Just keep looking at the camera, or keep looking at me until I say cut. And so when you're shooting that video, it's different to stills. I used to go to events and photograph the speaker on stage in about 90 seconds. I've got as many photos as I possibly can. And I sit down and listen to the speech. When you're videoing it, you need to video the entire thing because otherwise it doesn't make sense. So video just takes longer to capture. But if you're out photographing beautiful clouds over a hill, flick it to movie mode and shoot a video of it and leave it for 30 seconds and then come back later and just put that in a folder to play with later. So just start collecting some of that, and then sitting down and playing with the edit can be quite fun.
Yeah, I was just thinking that for a landscape photographer, it's representing movement is one of the great challenges in stills, and creating flow, and both, I guess, time lapse and video are two different methods of applying that sort of approach. Where would you see time lapse and video kind of separating from each other? What's the strength of one, and the strength relative to the other?
It's just the amount of time that you're representing. I love slow motion and I love time lapse because both of them are two extremes of the time that we all live in. The time lapse allows you to tell a long story in a very quick amount of time, and conversely, the slow motion allows you to show something that happened quickly, but slow it down and enjoy it. And, you know, especially when you're talking about like clouds going past, it sounds so menial, but when you see a great time lapse of clouds going past, you suddenly realize we don't even see that. We look out, we see clouds, we look back later, the clouds are different. We don't see the beauty of how they got from A to B. And that beauty can be told. There are many, many, many examples of really fantastic time-lapse photography where the camera moves through the scene at the same time as the scene is moving at various paces. There's a guy who runs, his brand was called Timescapes, and he put out a DVD, and he had a launch of this. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. He had a launch of his video at NAB, which is a big conference in Las Vegas. And I happened to be there that year doing a little documentary. And I went along to the launch, and it was fantastic. And it had been much hyped because we'd seen snippets of some of his work, and it was beautiful. But the problem was he didn't use that to tell a story. And so it was literally about 70 minutes of just time lapse. And you weren't taken on a journey. So actually, the biggest thing about video is telling a story, whatever that story is. It can be I'm making toast, or it can be kids playing at granddad's house. Whatever that story is, you have to tell a story with it. Otherwise, it becomes unwatchable.
So how much do you feel like that involves before you even turn up, you know, with the storyboarding or the understanding of relationship or working back from an outcome that you're aiming for? Like, because that's a whole nother sort of way of starting to approach things again. And once you get into it, I'm guessing those are the kind of things you really need to start spending time with.
Yeah. So the family stuff or the off the cuff stuff or the documentary, you can't script it. You can't script a documentary. You can script a journey if you're going to tell a story like that. But you literally have to shoot what happens in front of you. Otherwise, it's not really documentary. You're setting it up, and just like the documentary category. And so there's a time and a place. If a client comes to me and like I got asked yesterday, we want you to video a building with 3 interviews, and it needs to be 15 minutes long or maybe 5 minutes long. And that was the brief. And I'm like, how do I shoot that? Like, I can't shoot that. That's not possible to shoot because you haven't told me who's the audience. Who are we talking to? Is it a bunch of kids? Potentially we have to shoot it vertically because they're going to watch it on their phones, and that's who we're talking to. Is it, you know, oh no, it's a story about the building and it's going to be people who are interested in heritage buildings. I'm like, okay, so we've got time to shoot this, but we've got to have a story. So you really do have to sit down and at least mentally, if not physically, draw out a storyline of where to go and how. Because I had one of my entries for the fusion category was, I think it worked out to be 54 different shots for a music video that lasted 2.5 minutes. And I had 40 extras turn up on a Sunday afternoon for basically beer and chips. And there was no way I was going to get 50 shots done in 4 hours of shooting unless I had planned it. So I literally, because it was a music video, I started with the music. I could literally write and did write on video format a storyboard where I could have this 1.6 seconds as this shot, and that, what's that, 3.2 seconds, because it's twice as long, is another shot. And I was able to just tick them off, cut them out, put them in. All the shots of this guy we do at once, all the shots of those people do at once. And I was able to be really, really efficient with that storytelling. But there are times for storytelling with storyboards, and there are times for just seeing what happens. But at the end of the day, when I'm shooting my video, even that the kids running around the backyard, I'm already starting to imagine what it looks like in the edit. at the end. But that's because I've had 10 years of doing this. So when you're starting, don't stress too much about it. Just try and think, what is the purpose? Yes, I can shoot 30 seconds of a beautiful landscape, but stick that up on Twitter, send it out to social media, people will love it. But if I'm going to tell a story, I need to start thinking of, do I start before dawn, shoot a time lapse of the dawn, shoot various times during the day, and then shoot the sunset, and that's my story? Or what is the journey that you've got to take? You just got to start thinking that way.
Yeah, and I guess it's a little bit about understanding the output types, as you're suggesting. You know, if it's going to be on Instagram, you know, you might start. I don't even know if people consider shooting vertical video. I know I bought one of those gimbal, you know, DJI kind of mobile phone ones, particularly just for Instagram stories, because I thought, well, how else are you going to create that perfect kind of vertical format? And because transitioning from one to the other would just be either impossible or a nightmare, or would involve cropping right in. And then it's like, you know, what's the final rating going to be in terms of the resolution that you need? You know, when is it worth going super high resolution that you might need to crop in? Like, but I guess I think it's important to consider that shutter speed in particular. That seems to be one of the most consistent factors, that even though you are attesting the fact that you're less aware of that now, that seems to be a good starting point. Can you sort of explain what rolling shutter is and where that becomes a problem? That's, I think, for a lot of people.
Sure.
And we also had a question already from the audience about what kind of editing programs would you suggest starting out with?
Sure. So rolling shutter is an effect that we don't really see in photography because we're only shooting one frame at a time. But basically, when you and different cameras have different factors of rolling shutter. That can come down to the sensor size. It can come down to whether it's a crop sensor or whether it's full frame. There's all sorts of different factors that can create it. But basically what it is when you think of how they used to make films on film, the shutter would open, the film would be exposed, the shutter would close, the film would advance, the shutter would open, you know. And so that's just how it happened. Whereas electronically with these fancy digital sensors, it's literally writing data from one corner across to the other and then moving down a row and starting again. And cameras, even as fantastic as they are still crippled right now with a latency where there's a difference in microseconds between writing the first and writing the last pixel. And if your camera is moving across a scene while you're doing that, it's never going to capture still images and put them together, especially with longer shutter speeds. And so you end up with the straights, you know, the trees and the lampposts start to do this wobble jello effect, because it's literally writing the top of the lamppost at one part of the sensor, and then by the time it writes the bottom, the camera's moved. And so it comes when you pan your camera too fast, you get this wobbly effect. And so you either learn to embrace it and love it like a child, or you learn to not do that, and just slow your camera moves down and try not to get that effect. As we go into technology, it's getting less and less of an issue. But if you do notice it, then just slow down a little bit, or try not to. If you're following your kids or your grandkids and you're trying to go from one to the other, you're just going to make your audience sick.
So if we start the ball rolling on the kind of editing software and programs that are out there that you'd suggest people sort of start trying things out with, have you got some suggestions there?
You can pretty much start at the bottom with whatever free editing software comes on your computer. There are even some pretty cheap or free editing software for your phone. So if you want to start somewhere, maybe start with your phone, because you don't have to worry about the DSLR. You can just start practicing starting and stopping, telling stories, and then you can actually edit it on your phone. I personally use Premiere. If you really want to learn something crazy, you could go to DaVinci, which I think they have a free version, or most of it's free or whatever. But because I have the Adobe suite for my photography, I just naturally went over to Premiere, and I've stayed there ever since. And I like it. I've tried to move to other platforms and ended up coming back. Premiere does everything I need it to do. But I think early on, if you use, what's the Apple one? Final Cut, FCPX or whatever. There's Apple iMovie and stuff like that. All of those things are great. They won't have the functionality you want to do the sort of stuff I do, but you don't need that when you're learning. Really, to learn, you just need to be able to join clips together and make a video at the end. Whether you add music or whether you add titles or whatever, that's totally up to you. But iMovie does that really well, and Windows Movie Maker, will work as long as the machine's not crashing. So it's just one of those things. Just start with whatever you've got or whatever's free, and use that until you start pushing its boundaries, and then you can upgrade.
Do you have any suggestions of any particular training that you can access online, or is there anywhere in particular you think is worthwhile investing in terms of supporting that kind of transition?
I guess there are lots of free stuff, and there are quite a few paid trainings. It'll depend on the style that you enjoy, which will be different for everyone. But there's so much you can learn for free that I would just, if you're at the very beginner level, look up beginner video tutorial or whatever, and just start and just see where it takes you. Because the more you like or move on to the next one, the more you'll teach YouTube what you're looking for, and the more it'll serve that up to you. And you'll find your own path that way. And then when it comes to trainings, there's all sorts, and you can spend whatever you want. There's little cost and there's massive cost and everything in between. So it's very much a personal choice because of the style that you already have, or the style of tutor that you like, or the fact that you just like little chunks, or you want really long videos. There's no real one size fits all for everybody. But if you want to look something up and flick it through to me and say, what do you reckon of this? But again, I'm pretty much always going to say, well, if it works for you, it's great, because I can't tell you what you need. Only you can do that. And there's plenty of it out there.
So we hinted about phones. Where do you see phones sitting in that kind of realm? Like, I mean, they're doing 4K video on most of the high-end model phones already. And
well, yes,
there's certain probably applicable elements to that. Obviously not so much for commercial work, but certainly social media, it's huge, and behind the scenes sort of work. And I mean, that's where I sort of started first thinking about applying video, was just getting a simple phone gimbal, thinking, well, I'm not ready to invest in any production thing, but I'm going to learn a little bit about it and get some material that I will actually be able to apply, at least from a social media point of view. But you probably got more idea where it's heading, or where the major disadvantages are that they're never going to overcome, type thing.
Well, the never going to overcome thing is probably the beautiful bokeh, the f2.8 or 1.8 or 1.4 look that we can get with our DSLRs or even our cinema cameras, because of the fact that the sensor is literally this big. You're really going to struggle to get that depth of field. But having said that, the benefit, I mean, people have made movies on them just to say that it's possible. Feature movies on phones. So, don't write them off just yet, especially now with, like you say, the 4K, the 150 frames per second, 200 frames per second, whatever they're coming out with next. They're all time and a place. Like I said before, if you treat it well, if you light it well, if you get great sound and you have great stabilization, or you stick it on a tripod, when they do these, I've seen these shoot-offs between phones versus cameras, and sometimes you just can't tell what's what. But when you look at the behind the scenes, the phone is mounted in this massive tripod, and it's on a big dolly, and it's got these fantastic lights, and they've all got sound that they can add on later. So it's not just relying on what the phone brings, it's using the phone to capture the video, but then capturing their own sound and lighting it like you would light a studio shoot or any other shoot. Because if you light it properly, you'll get great footage. If you get someone to stand with the light behind them and you push go and say hi to Grandad, they're just going to be a silhouette no matter what. So you've really still got to bring your photographic knowledge to the table, but you can't write off phones as junk, because they are actually producing amazing results. So like I say, it could be a good place to start, because the software can be downloaded from the Apple Store or the Play Store, and you can start editing and outputting from your phone, and you don't even need other technology to make that happen.
Yeah, it's certainly something I considered, like, being out in the landscape, wanting to tell a behind the scenes sort of story. I bought one of those little phone tripod so I could just put a little time lapse on, when we're setting up an exhibition or I'm shooting a sunset. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, it's not that hard to plug a lavalier into that with a little bit of extender, and actually that's not high production, but it's actually quite functional.
Yep.
And it involves almost no kit and almost no weight. I can take it sort of anywhere. And then I invested in maybe the Filmic Pro kind of software, which is editing in the phone. I've been too slack to actually use it, but it was my first sort of, what's my first little inroad into video that I'm more comfortable with, that is going to be quite ergonomic and functional and easy and quick. And my output, I guess, was more social media or a little bit of personal work than anything else. But yeah, it surprised me when I thought about what they can do, just how versatile it is, because everyone's going to have one on them most of the time.
Yeah. And like there's that great saying, the best camera is the one that you've got with you. And to be honest, if you've got fantastic video but your sound's rubbish, people won't watch it. But if you've got pretty Joe average video but your sound's amazing, people will lap it up and it'll go viral. Because
that was my next question. Like the first thing I learned about when I got into video a little bit more is sound is king, and sound is the most complex potentially and most challenging thing to nail and do really well. And it's at the core of any real production. And I don't think, this series as landscape photographers, that's what we've got in mind. So maybe you can help sort of help us all sort of wrap our heads around, how significant it is and how to think about it in the bigger picture.
If you look at, I guess it's the ABC in Australia, I'm not sure. National Radio in New Zealand has, it's all radio and it's funded by the government. So they just go out and find stories because they can. The beautiful thing about what they do is the Foley, the sound that they use to tell those stories, so that you can be listening on the radio but really feel like you're in that environment. And they go around with a microphone, they interview people, but then they'll just walk up to a babbling brook and just record that, and they'll get traffic going past, and they'll get someone closing a door, and they just get all this extra sound. If you can bring that to a video of nature, then that will actually transport those people even more into that landscape than just the video itself. But that opens up another can of worms, which is not only getting good sound and having to have a microphone and blah, 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 but actually you then go into the realm of music and music licensing and royalty-free music and all the rest of it. And there's nothing like adding a piece of music to some footage, like especially when we talk about drones later, but the drone doesn't record sound. And if it did, it would just be the sound of propellers. So you don't want that sound anyway. And so you're always having to add something when you're using a drone shot. You've got to add your own stuff. And sometimes it makes sense to add some sound from an environment that makes sense to what you're looking at. But most of the time I just add music. And I've traveled through many different websites and many thousands of dollars of buying songs, because you can't just grab a song that you like, AC/DC, yeah, and you'll just get chucked off YouTube and your account will be blocked. Or it'll play, but it'll play with screeds of ads and someone else makes the money from that. So you don't want that. And so there are a couple of places I can recommend to go where I pay an annual subscription because I use so much. I'm spending about maybe $400 a year for the subscription, but I can go on whenever we want. I could go and now pick a song and add it to a video right now, and I don't have to pay for it. I pay a subscription, and their quality is amazing. So every type of music, some with lyrics, some without. It's just really cool. But it's really important. In fact, I might segue just now because we've had a lot of talking heads. I'll play this show reel that I've got. So this show reel that I've put together a couple of years ago, 2019, so it's about a year old now. I haven't shot much since then, so it's pretty relevant stuff. But what it is it's all photographed with a drone, all shot with a drone. Some of it doesn't look like it is because of its location. Drone doesn't need to be 300 feet up. It can be at eye height, but it just gives you another sort of way of using a camera. So I'll play this, and then it's got a little bit of music to it, but you'll notice that I've edited the scenes to the music so that it makes sense. And some people notice it, some people don't, but it's really quite important. So let me do that and that. Hear the music. So you can see the storytelling that goes into even just a collection of clips. If you can pause using the music's natural pauses on a scene that takes a long time to develop, like that last scene, it just allows emotion to be brought up. Whereas if I played that video to you the first time without any sound, you'd just literally be looking at pictures. Wouldn't make as much sense. So that's just an example of using music. I don't have any other sound to go with it. I've just got one musical track, finding a piece of music that draws out some kind of emotion, and then editing the content I've got to match those emotions. And I mean, it's a show reel. It's a look what I can do with a drone, so that I can send that to clients and say, what do you want? Pick one of these or give me something new. And that's all about hoping that they watch the video and come out of it going, wow, there's some really cool stuff there. So it's just building that credibility and promise that I can deliver. And it's all done with visuals and audio. Not a single word was spoken. It's just literally telling a visual story.
Ollie, what were the places you're going to suggest to maybe start looking in terms of sound? I mean, I've done a little bit, and I've found it kind of painfully slow with some of the cheaper ones in particular to find anything of quality. It doesn't sound like elevator music, you know, but...
Yeah. I will go to this one and share my screen. I used to be on one that was called Premium Beat, and they would charge you per track. And you know, that's fine, doesn't really matter. But what I found was that was too limiting. And, you know, I would come home from having shot something with my family and want to put some music to it and think, oh, I can't do that because it's like $75 to buy a track. Where is it? This one here, I think. So this one is called Artlist.io. This is the one where you can pay a subscription per year. What's really cool is that you can actually flick through. You could use this like Spotify, where you could just push play on the first track. I don't know if you can hear that, but it'll play the track, and then it'll go to the next one. And you can use it just to listen to music in the background, which can be really quite inspiring. But you can select a mood or a video theme. So if you wanted to go aerials, you'd come down here, and this has obviously been tags that they've added, the staff at this place, but most of these would suit to go with an aerial, for example. You can pick a genre. So I want it something cinematic, or I want it lounge music, because I think that will suit my thing so much. Or I want a particular instrument. So I definitely need vocals, or I definitely need bells and whistles. So it's quite unique. The downside to this website is that it uses some form of caching where it downloads the whole track, and you can play through it, and then you can go to the next one. I get about 5 or 6 tracks through, and it stops working, and I have to refresh the screen and go to the 7th one. But apart from that, the music quality, which is the key thing you want, is out of this world. And then the user experience of using the website is very useful, being able to narrow it down with all those keywords, and by far would be my biggest suggestion for where you'd get your music. But I can understand that the sort of $400 a year might be a bit much for some people. So what I would do, if you don't publish it online, if you publish it on Vimeo don't chase you up like YouTube do, but you can publish a video to Vimeo that is hidden, and only the people with the code will ever see it. And you could quite easily make videos and use AC/DC or Queen or U2, and it shows my age, and create movies that fit with that music. You just can't publish it, or, you know, if someone finds out, they'll ask you to take it down. So it's not something you'd want to put up on social media. But yeah, Artlist is the best. There will be other ones if you can find some that will give you free stuff. But, you know, just use any music when you're starting. But when you start doing commercial work, I recommend Artlist is by far the best.
So we sort of just, you showed us a show reel of drone work, and I guess in a lot of ways that's a show in itself. But it'd be nice to kind of just at least maybe start touching base with where and how you see that as one of the progression points of how you moved away from stills, and where it really sits as a really functional tool in terms of storytelling. And
Yep.
I guess, a little bit about your transition into that and your learnings.
Yeah, well, I guess drones came after I started with video. So I started shooting with the DSLR, and then I got this other camera and I started shooting time lapse. And then, DJI came out with their fantastic drones. And my first real big experience, I'll just play in the background. I'll turn the music down, but I'll just talk over the top of it. And I might jump between a couple of videos just to show you stuff. The one I'm going to play you now is, you would have seen a couple of those shots. So this shot here is of New York City. I went across with a guy called Trey Ratcliffe back in 2015. And he hired me to come and tell his stories. And so I would, for example, this day, the first day of the tour was in New York City. And we went on a photo walk. And I basically filmed the whole photo walk. Back in 2015, you could just pull out a drone in New York City and fly. Now they would shoot you, and then they'd shoot you again, and then they'd ask if you had permission. So it's not something you can really do anymore. And so I was quite lucky to go on this trip of about 3 weeks, because I got to fly in some really cool places that would just be so hard to do now. So I'll just play this in the background, and the sound's down, so don't worry about that. But this was just a collection of all the highlights from this particular trip around America. We went to, 11 cities in 19 days or something. It was quite full on. And every one of them, I was filming him doing his photo walk. There was sound to worry about. There was sort of everyone was moving, so I couldn't take too much gear. And we literally walked from one part of the city to another, so I couldn't leave gear and come back and get it. So it was a real challenge. And then at the end of the night, I had to edit it all as we drove on a bus to the next city. And by lunchtime the next day, it was online, and we started filming the next one. So it was a full-on 3 weeks.
Sleep when you're dead, Ollie.
Yeah, exactly. Sleep when you're dead. But like I say, this is Miami. There was a lightning storm, so you see this flash of lightning if the video keeps up across the web. But it was just one of those opportunities where I was able to tell these stories. And so how did I transition into it? This was my first big opportunity to fly my drone. So I really was a novice flying in amongst the cities of America all over the place, telling these stories. But it wasn't that much of a challenge on two fronts. One, I knew video and I knew photography, so I knew what a good picture looked like. And so all a drone is, it's a tripod in the sky. Basically, you get to put your camera wherever you want in three-dimensional space. And if you understand camera movement, you can then move your camera through that space to tell a story, sideways, forwards, backwards, or even not at all. There's a shot you might have seen earlier of the Volvo ocean race in Auckland Harbour. And one of my favorite shots is when it's just literally sitting still and the race is just sailing away from them, because you can't get that shot ever unless you get a big helicopter and go up there yourself. So, sometimes movement is necessary, and sometimes a lack of movement is even more powerful. But so I knew videography and I knew photography, and I'd also played Xbox as a kid. And so I had this controller in my hand with these two thumb controllers, up, down, left, right, rotate, and all sorts of stuff. And so the actual technical element of flying came pretty naturally to me. So I really enjoyed that. This is the one thing that isn't a drone. It's actually a drone strapped to a pole, because they wouldn't let you fly it in that desert. But everything else, the drone is flying. And
didn't know you've been to Burning Man, Ollie.
I didn't. That was a shot supplied to me. I left, and Burning Man was like 2 weeks later, and he didn't have the budget to pay me to stay, and I didn't want to stay without being paid, so I just came home.
Yeah, I saw his shots from there.
Yeah. Well, every year he goes, I think. But that there is sort of flying over Brooklyn, or somewhere near the Brooklyn Bridge, I think it was. And you just, there he is there down at Miami, me filming him flying his drone. So yeah, it was a really cool experience. And again, it's just one of those things where you get to play with photography in a whole new way, because you just get a vantage point that you can't otherwise get. So transition was pretty easy. It came naturally. I love tech. I love early adoption. I love pushing the boundaries of things. I did crash my drone in this city here, and I had to start again, and that was fine. You're not really a pilot until you've crashed. So if you start flying your drone, then prepare to crash.
There you go, Loki.
Oh yeah. You can plan all you want, but when it goes wrong, I basically flew around the side of a building and there was a radio tower and it just took over and there was nothing I could do. But yeah, it's just storytelling in a different way. And for a novice, you just slow down, make the camera movements smooth and easy. You know, the beautiful thing about these drones, the DJI ones, is that they allow you to just fly crazy, and the gimbal takes all the movement out of it, and you're just left with this beautiful, soft, silky, smooth footage.
I still find ways to make it look jerky, Ollie.
Beef jerky.
Oh, that's fantastic. And do you would you always film in 4K if you could, just in terms of giving yourself croppability and that kind of thing?
Yeah, it depends on how much memory I have left. It depends on the projected output, and it depends on whether I want 50 frames per second, because most of the drones will give you 4K or 50 frames per second. And so you're limited a little bit. The Inspire that I've got will give you 4K at 50 frames, but only at a certain resolution. So you kind of have to pick one or the other. And yeah, it's just, you know, what is the intention? What is the output? If I'm going to fly it to go with a story where I've got slow motion, I'll probably just shoot it HD and pick the 50 frames and, you know, get a nice picture grade. But then sometimes 4K is a little bit too much. On these shots, actually, I shot most of them 4K and then down sampled them to 1080p, which actually improved the sharpness of the image because I was shrinking it. And so for a while there, for about 3 years, that was how I shot everything. Now the resolution is much better, and so I can shoot one or the other. But yeah, there's usually, if I can, I'll shoot at 4K. But if I think I might want it in 50 frames, I will make that my prime concern and not worry about the 4K.
So what's your drone of choice at the moment?
I shoot on the Inspire 2. I'll look that up for you guys so you can see what it looks like. And it's a beautiful piece of kit, but it's quite expensive. The good thing about it is that it, here we go. It allows me to control the camera separate of the craft, and it allows me to. So this is the drone here, that one, and so when you take off, the legs lift up out of the way, so the camera can move around 360 degrees or 540 degrees, whatever it is, without getting the legs in front of it. If you fly a Phantom, the worst part of flying a Phantom is the white legs sticking down into your picture. The Mavic, which is a smaller version, again, it doesn't have legs, so you don't get it often, but you can quite often get the props will come down into your top of your picture. And so that setup there, the basic setup is about $7,000, and then you have to buy a bigger camera that you can swap lenses. This is one of the lenses. No, sorry, I forget that my camera is on autofocus, and it doesn't focus all that well when it's on video. So this is the lens, one of the lenses by DJI. I believe they bought Hasselblad.
Yep.
And so the DJI lenses are pretty fancy Hasselblad lenses. This thing weighs next to nothing, can't even use it as a paperweight, and it's about $2,500. So it's not fun to buy a full set of those. There's 4 of them, and the camera that goes with it. I bought mine secondhand, camera and lens kit for $8,000, and that was down from the recommended retail of about 14. So I've shelled out quite a bit for my kit, but it does allow me to, you know, someone can ring up and say we need some footage for a TV commercial, and I can go do that, whereas you couldn't do it on the smaller cameras. But yeah, that's my choice. The other good thing about this model, excuse me, is that the size of it means that you can be in 25 to 30 knot winds, and the craft will be leaning to save its life, but the picture will be steady and stable. In fact, I have one here that I can show you if it's not that one. Aerial show reel, not that one. I went out this one here. I went out and filmed a, oopsie, it's too loud. Turn you down. Went out and filmed a launch for a friend of mine. They wanted to sell this craft, and so we went out into the harbour and shot it, and they would crank it up to 20 knots, and I was able to, you know, fly in front of it and alongside it and behind it wherever I wanted. And so that's the beauty of the larger craft, is that you can actually, it's more powerful, it can handle the strong wind, whereas the tiny Mavics are great until the wind blows and then they end up in a tree. So these bigger ones are just that much more stable, which is cool. But this is the stock standard lens that comes with it for that $7,000 price tag. So even the basic lens is quite beautiful.
Did you actually do a boat launch, or was it you launched from the shore and followed?
No, I took off from the front. The beauty of that one is that it had a big front, a big nose on it, so I could take off and land there. I did have one hairy experience landing on a different. I've got that one ready to go actually, so I can just show you that.
Yeah, if you type in YouTube drone crash, half of them involve a boat. They seem to find, so
yeah,
it worries me.
Yeah, it's pretty nasty. This one here, I could have landed on the roof, but it was a little bit choppy out where we were. The pilot of this boat said to me, "Tell you what, take off here, and we'll go out into the open water, and then when you want to land, we'll come back in here." And then so we drive out into the open water, and I'm flying around it there, and I'm like, "Right, let's go back in." And he's like, "Oh no, we're not going to go back in. You can just land it." So it was really not fun, and it was the shot that created that shot, which we saw earlier on. And in fact, if I leave it play for a bit, I think I look up with the camera so you see where we were. It's a beautiful place up there. I don't know if you've ever been to Trook Lagoon, but it's a diver's paradise. They've got it was a massive battle near the end of World War II, and they just flew in there and sank this merchant navy. So there's heaps of boats out there. It's one of the best diving spots in the world. And there's one place where you can go where you can touch a World War I ship and a World War II ship at the same time. They're literally lying next to each other. So diver's paradise, but also from this viewpoint, a beautiful look down onto the atoll and out across the ocean. So yeah, it was a beautiful spot, but it, you know, came into land, and he basically said, just do it yourself. And I think, yeah, I come flying in. It's obviously not a great video, but I was quite concerned because the boat was moving. Actually, there you can see the boat. So just at the bottom of frame, I'm no longer concerned about framing, but the boat's rocking left and right, and the wind's pushing the drone.
Oh,
and I'm like, how do I land this $7,000 piece of machinery without bouncing off one of the posts and it landing in the drink? And I ended up just sort of giving up trying to do it gracefully. I backed it in and slammed it down on the deck and broke one of the rotors, but at least I landed it. The rotors are like $15 each, so it doesn't matter. But
I think people underestimate the adrenaline factor.
Oh, I was just going to say,
they hadn't had one before. Welcome to a world of adrenaline.
Shaking for about half an hour after that. It was not fun. And of course, the gimbal takes all the movement out of it.
That's all I can think about with some of those scenes you had through the cities and things.
Yeah, it's hairy, but it's fun, and the footage.
Oh, sorry, I think my connection's a bit slow.
No, that's right. The footage really makes up for it. So you know, I'm not sure what we're going to see here. It probably just crashes on. This is me trying to chicken out. Are you sure we can't go back to shore? And it's a very quick...
How much battery life did you have left, Ollie?
I was getting low, and that was one of the things. Was I actually bang? There it is. Boof.
Oh, that's a boof.
And everyone's like, yeah, well done. There's another boat just off the side. Yeah, Ollie. And I'm like, dude, I just cracked the blade. I'm shaking now. I'm not happy at all. Anyway, so that was the hairy part. But, you know, in amongst this flight, we got these great scenes. of the island and of boats for this doco that this guy wants to do. He's trying to sell it to Netflix or Google. So it's definitely worth it. But that's a 17-minute recording, and that's one flight. So I must have been really close to zero battery, because this thing takes 2 batteries to fly and they last about 18 minutes. So depends on the wind, of course. But yeah, I would have been down at the sort of 15% mark, I reckon.
I have been out on the end of boats, my hands up in the air trying to catch phantoms.
The phantoms are easy to catch. This thing
They got the 2 little handles.
Take your hand off if you get it wrong.
Yeah, I've tried a few one-handed catches with my Mavic. I got that wrong.
Like that as well.
What was that, Luke?
Oh, I think we drop you. Your turn to drop house. My turn. Early on.
Sorry, I was just saying the Mavics are a bit like that as well with the yeah. No. Well, that's not good.
So Ollie, we're obviously, you know, not everyone's going to invest in and inspire straight off the bat.
Do you
There's just enough delay for delay to be delaying. There we go, Luke's back. Got your jacket. It's all in the way you hold your tongue, Luke.
What was that?
It's all in the way you hold your tongue.
I just had to put up the aerial, so hopefully that improves. It's pretty primitive setup here down in Tassie, but anyway, seem to have run not too bad over the last few shows. So I was just wondering, in terms of grading and that kind of thing, do you like to D-log, or with your Sony use S-log and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, the best way of getting the most out of your video footage is to shoot it flat, to shoot low contrast, low sharpness, low everything, because like a JPEG will throw most of your data away, video and MP4 format is throwing most of your data away. If you shoot it in MOV and you shoot it with a really flat look, then you can bring it into post-production and add your contrast later and recover your highlights and your shadows. So I try to shoot in a D-log. A log is basically the format of keeping it as flat as possible, and then D for DJI, or S for Sony, or C for Canon. So yeah, the log format is by far the best to edit with, and I try to shoot that whenever possible, because I can always make it look however I want later, and if I add it to another camera, I might need to have more data available so I can make it look as close to that other camera as possible. But yeah, if you're just starting out, don't worry about it. Just shoot whatever you can and leave the basic settings, and worry about not crashing and not causing other craft to crash. I don't know what the rules are like in Australia, but it's pretty restricted here. Having said that, I was for 10 years for 5 years the official photographer of the Auckland airport, and I worked there for 10 years, and that came to an end back in March because of COVID, because the airport dropped to about 2% operational capacity and income, and they immediately got rid of every contractor they had. So I haven't worked there since March. But for a number of years, I was out at the Auckland International Airport, and I was flying my drone near the airport, never over the runway, but pretty much up to the side of the runway. And that was all within the rules and stuff, but that was an easier place to fly than potentially in the city, because there's helipads and there's councils who want you to pay them money to fly over their roads and all sorts of crap that goes on. So the airport's actually a lot easier to fly. But yeah, it's a great tool, and if you can just go out into a field and play with it and start learning how to do it. But then there's a mode in the DJI cameras and drones called tripod mode, and that just slows everything down. And I can't recommend that enough, because it's very easy to add motion sickness to your video by just whipping it left and right, up and down. And you really need to learn to finesse your shots. Some of those shots in that show reel are just really slow. And as soon as it moves a little bit, it adds that movement. You don't need to move 500 meters for people to get it. So
Another thing that DJI seems to do is their default gimbal settings in terms of up and down seems to be very sensitive, and so it's quite easy just to go way too quickly with that kind of thing as well.
so many videos online. I wish they wouldn't do it because it gives drones a bad rap. But so many videos online of, hey, look, I got a drone for Christmas, Zzz. And that's it. End of the video. Yeah, you've really got to take it slow. If you are going to get into drones, actually go get lessons. It sounds silly, but it's not. It's not silly at all. I've had training, and I've got a certificate that allows me to do things that some people can't. So it's worth upskilling as much as you can, because they'll take a kid's eye out or crash a plane or something horrible. I don't want to be that guy.
And then also in terms of public liability insurance, I guess on that same thread as well, just in case something terrible does happen.
Yeah, well, as I do this commercially, I need to have that anyway, and so that's fine. I do, but you do need to worry about the fact that it may not be your fault. It may be a fault in the craft. I had one guy who bought a drone from overseas, took it out, put the batteries in, took off, flew around for ages, and then it decided, well, I'm going to fly home now because I'm low on battery. Problem is, home was set as China or wherever it came from, and the thing just took off and never came back.
Oh dear.
So
yeah, and there's also settings as well where if you lose connection, if you don't set it correctly, it'll just land wherever it is. So if you lose connection over the water or something like that, not a good outcome there.
No, that's right. And again, when drones first came out, everyone started posting videos of drone fails compilation, 2016 or whatever it was. And that was bad, because then people who don't know would look at it and go, drones are going to kill me. And I flew a drone once, and this lady came up to me, is that thing going to kill me? And I said, probably. And she ran away. But yeah, the initial technology in these things was quite limited, and it would just go, oh, I'm low now, so I'm going to land. And there's pictures of people running and jumping into ponds and catching it inches above the water. And now my one has sensors, so if it's running low and I haven't told it to fly home, it will just go, right, screw you, I'm going home anyway. It'll turn around and go, oh, there's a tree, I'm going to fly over that. Whereas the one that I lost control of in Atlanta, might have been Atlanta. No, it wasn't Atlanta, somewhere else. Flew around past a building. There was a radio tower that I couldn't see. It went, oh, radio tower, mama. And off it took, lost connection with me. And then it said, oh, I've lost connection, turned around and flew into the building. And so it was kind of out of my hands, although it was a bit silly that I was that far away. So it was my fault at the end of it. It's always your fault, but sometimes it's not your fault. It's the gear.
Yeah, where do you see? I find, I hesitated a long time to get one because of the level of restriction, I guess, that I felt, particularly in Tasmania. Like straight off the bat, national parks are out, and most of what I wanted to shoot, and it was already gone before I started, and I was just kind of hanging back, thinking this is going to get shut down real fast as soon as some kid with his Kmart drone just takes somebody's eye out or hits grandma on the chops, and I'm just still kind of waiting for it all to all come crumbling down. And I'm also aware of, Luke's done a lot more in terms of upskilling himself and getting his certification and getting under, liability umbrellas, which is quite a lot of work and a lot of investment. And I think it's starting to pay off for him, but I'm still trying to decide if I want to spend all that money and all that time, because the commercial applicability and usefulness is getting narrower and narrower, that without having permissions and insurances and sort of from all sorts of different areas that. And I guess you've seen that transition from when you started flying over Brooklyn to now, and I guess you're already kind of through that threshold where you still got the licensing and capacity to use it commercially. But for somebody way back who's starting out, I'm sort of wondering, where it's heading and whether it's sort of worth investing all that time and money into it.
It must have been like the first settlers crossing the American plains going, we can have all of this, we just claim it. Flying back in 2015 was just, you just take off and you fly and you shoot the shot you want and you land. And if someone asks a question, you just say, something in French and they give up. You know, it was really beautiful. It was a wonderful time. Nowadays, to cross a road, you need permission of the council. To cross a piece of land, you need permission of the owner. So it becomes so prohibitive, and I can understand why. But it's all of these rules are brought in by people who sit behind a desk, potentially have never ever flown a drone, and really don't see how unobtrusive and non-dangerous they can be, because the media and the you know that drone that was supposedly flying around Gatwick, was it Gatwick in London? And you know, there's conspiracy theory, I guess, saying that it never was a drone. It was just someone ringing up, and anytime they said that, okay, we'll go back to normal, he rang up and said, I've seen a drone again. You know, like there's a lack of evidence to prove there ever was a drone there. And so it was just media hype around this event that, yeah, okay, it shut down the whole airport. And if it was a terrorist act or whatever, then so it should. But really, like, I can fly 100 meters from a craft coming into land, and there's nothing I will do that will endanger that craft. Maybe the drone will decide to fly off in a tizzy fit. So yeah, it's probably not a clever thing to do, but literally I'll fly through the eye of a needle if I have to. And it's really not going to harm anyone. So the actual level of danger versus the perceived level of danger is so out of whack. It's crazy. It's like the gold silver ratio. It doesn't make any sense. So I think that, yes, we're living in an age where the red tape has spoiled the fun and you can't just go and do it anymore. But, you know, if you look around and no one's watching, just do it, because probably get away with it. It's probably all right.
Should we cut that out of the video, Luke?
No, I mean, it's everyone has their personal point of view, but I do certainly agree with some of those approaches and how challenging it can be. And even for myself, I've had to do a lot of training to be able to apply for permits to fly in national parks and things like that. It's very, very challenging.
And actually, national parks is the big kicker for me. Like, they blanket no drones over national parks. I mean, pretty much the whole of Hawaii is a national park. So you can't fly your drone in Hawaii. And ironically, okay, so I can fly over that that sort of slum over there. That's okay. But if you want me to fly where it's most beautiful, then I'm not allowed to. And I can understand the reasoning, because, you know, the problem is the idiots. The idiots will buy a drone and they'll find a flock of geese and they'll fly into them, or they'll find a herd of cattle and they'll go, you know, split the herd up and make them jump a fence and stuff. And it's the same guys that are out there, you know, shooting their shotguns and drinking out of the back of the car. It's just idiots. Like, come on, you're literally spoiling it for the rest of us. So, you know, everything I do, every time I take off, I have to do a pre-flight check. I have to alert the authority. I have to go online and book a flight. You know, I do it all by the letter of the law. But if you're just learning and you're allowed to, so that in New Zealand, you can fly a certain size of craft, so up to the Phantom size, you just take it to a local park, you know, green area, and fly it. They're fine. But I fly the Inspire and I'm not allowed to. So, you know, you've just kind of got to learn as much as you can, and then worry about getting those permits later if it's going to make you money, or if you're going to have to ask someone for permission, and then you need it.
Yeah, it's definitely there's a lot of grey areas, and a lot of it's very I guess frustrating when you are very committed to, I guess, as a professional, you know, you have to abide by the rules, because you don't want to you've got to need to be able to operate into the future, I suppose. Whereas a tourist can just come in and fly however much they like, and unfortunately, it's they can probably get away with things that you couldn't. So
yeah, because they just do it. Like the guy who flew over the Auckland Harbour Bridge just because he felt like it, and we're all going, "I'd love that footage." I'm just going to push play in the background and show you some other applications I've used the drone for. This was the end of a time-lapse project I did, where they'd finished doing the 5 floors of installing a staircase into an already existing building. and I just used the drone to add to that. So this will just play in the background, and there'll be other footage as well that comes along. But you kind of see the raw footage out of the camera for those of you, including this blank, boring stuff. You go, keep asking questions, and I'll talk. But at least you'll be able to see something else.
Yeah. Like where do you see it heading in the future? Like, do you see it getting more restrictive or more open, or the intelligence of the drones enable us to do things we can't do yet? Where do you see it heading?
I mean, they've looked at, and they almost have the ability to make deliveries by drone. In New Zealand, a couple of years ago, there was a company that was going to start delivering pizzas locally by drone, and there was a whole bunch of stuff that went on with local politicians who were out to sort of see the unveiling of this technology. It never really eventuated because the area they wanted to fly was right near a military base, and they hadn't really thought of asking permission for that. And of course, the military said no. So it was all a bit of a laugh. But I do see this technology in the future becoming more and more accessible as my kids grow up to be the dominant generation of the world. They'll kind of look at us oldies and go, "What do you mean you said no? It's only a drone," and all the fear won't be there, and that will just allow more use cases to crop up. Things like 5G. I know some people think it's terrible, but I don't know enough to know one way or the other, but I know that people thought 3G was terrible, and then they thought 4G was terrible. So maybe it's not as bad as we think. But if, for example, it's not terrible, and yet you can have this immense amount of data being shared between 5G cell towers, then you literally could have a network of cell towers helping drones to fly by themselves, where you're able to just deliver pizzas and all sorts of stuff. Who knows? I mean, there's all sorts of applications that you could use it if they are controllable, and 5G has that capacity where it's so much data bandwidth that you could be watching the video of the drone, you could be controlling it remotely from kilometers away or even different parts of the world. So yeah, I think the technology will not go away. It will only get better. And as companies like DJI push the boundaries and help to sort of give us ideas of where that could be used, then that will only get better as well.
How did you find it flying in the building like that? Just had a question, like, is it pretty nerve-wracking?
Incredibly nerve-wracking. I hired a smaller drone for this one. It's the Phantom. Because I just didn't trust the massive size of my one. It just has so much downdraft that it really causes a lot of dangerous, when you get close to a wall, it can create its own wind pattern that makes no sense to the pilot. So I hired the Phantom, and yeah, it is crazy, but I put the little wing guards on it, so it wasn't going to break a wingtip. And you just have to be in control the whole time and not have people come up to you and say, "Well, that's nice. How much did that cost?" Because that's what they usually say.
Yeah, it's funny too. Sometimes you see people approaching you when you're flying, and you're worried about, oh, here we go, someone's gonna tell me off or say they don't like it, but then they just end up wanting to chat about it and wanting to know what model it is and all of that. So
and that's 99% of the cases of people who approach you are just genuinely interested and couldn't care less about the safety factor. Last week I was on a shoot at a building site, getting an after shot showing the finished works, and because of lockdown in Auckland, too many people were at home, and I knocked on a bunch of doors. I just didn't knock on this one particular house, and the guy came storming across the street and started abusing me about the fact that he works with drones and he knows the law, and I'm in trouble and I've broken the law and I can't do this, and blah blah blah, whatever he had to say. He's a real hero. He ended up being a CIO of the company, chief information officer. So he obviously a pencil pusher who likes to have his own way with people. And but at the end of it all, I actually had to stop flying because I was so irate with the way he treated me that I was shaking, and I took off and immediately knew I couldn't control the craft anymore, and so I had to can the flight because it was suddenly dangerous for me to be flying, because all I wanted to do was punch him in the head. But of course you can't do that in the civil society. And so I just, I said, yes, sir, no, sir, I've got the permit to do what I'm doing here, sir. And he just tore my ear off and took my license plate down and asked to see my credentials and blah, blah, blah. And I just had to go home because I wasn't in any state to keep flying. So, by approaching someone and throwing the rule book at them, he was wrong. And we spoke with the CAA that night, the Civil Aviation Authority down in Wellington, and they just laughed and said, if he writes through a complaint, we'll get rid of him for you. Because I'd done everything by the book. I'd booked the flight. I'd done the pre-flight check. I'd knocked on houses' doors. I just happened to encroach over his driveway for 5.2 seconds by approximately 3 meters. And I was in motion the whole time. And my license allows me to be over property without permission, as long as I don't hover for more than 60 seconds. And he was like, you hovered for more than 60. Oh, bullshit, mate. So anyway, it was just one of those things where by approaching me and attacking me, he made the situation worse. So well done, buddy. But luckily I'd got enough footage anyway, and the client was happy. So we just left.
What I find a little bit ironic when I look at the applications that I would like to apply, particularly from a landscape and nature perspective, is that if I'm filthy rich, I can go and hire a chopper for $2,000 an hour and fly over anything I want.
Yeah.
And can you tell me that that's somehow less safe or less invasive than flying a drone around the same place?
Yeah, unfortunately, the real issue is that people not everyone can go out and do that, whereas most people could go out and buy a drone and take it to those sort of places. And so the accessibility is so much greater with the drone that if they allowed it for one person, then they're in a situation where then it's like the thin end of the wedge from that perspective, if you know what I mean. And you get into a position where folks will say, well, you let that person do it, why can't you let me do it? And they actually don't have any reason to say no at that point. So I think that's a bigger part of the issue there.
Ollie, I'm assuming technically you're looking at the similar kind of settings that you're talking about for the 5D4, and that 25p and 50 frames a second on the shutter to keep it smooth. Is it fairly similar?
Yeah, it is fairly similar. But again, I've kind of, with the drone, given up the idea of smooth video. It ends up looking pretty smooth anyway. So I'm not too concerned about most of those. It's more about, with the drone, the biggest choice for me is, am I shooting 4K or am I shooting 50 frames per second? Those are the two limitations, really. Do I need a neutral density filter just because of how bright or whatever? But most of the time, I'm a bit of a shoot from the hip when it comes to the drone. And for me, it's more about the storytelling. And now that I've got this camera with multiple lenses, the lens choice, the camera settings themselves, they tend to just work pretty much all the time, as long as I shoot the exposure right, and I shoot in D-Log. So I've got that basically raw kind of footage where I can save the highlights and the shadows. And the rest of it's then the storytelling and what do I need to tell. Sorry, this is making me sick. That's the problem with watching raw footage is okay, I'm coming into land now and I might not have pushed stop on the record. So yeah, it's less about the settings and more about the storytelling. And I think you can get hung up a bit on the technical side of things and actually miss the point of the actual video itself. With video, you kind of shoot and you're trying to cover your bases for storytelling. In this particular scene, I'm showing, this is a planting. So there's this push to plant 1 billion trees, in New Zealand, because we're all green and all that. So this was to sort of show this planting day out near the airport. And I was showing the plantings as they came to the airport in their little cups and boxes and stuff. Oh, look, there's a shadow of the drone. Cut that out. So yeah, you're just trying to shoot as much as you can while the battery's still live and trying to tell different angles of the story. And then, when you're shooting video for a production, there's the A roll and the B roll, and the A roll is the stuff that you really need, and the B roll is just extras. But when you're in a drone, you're kind of shooting both at the same time because you just don't know, what do I need to tell the story? there's one thing I've invested in recently, which has been a lifesaver, and that is it's called a crystal sky monitor, and it just allows me to see in a bright sunshine day what the camera's seeing. In that last scene, it was so bright I just couldn't even see that you could see the shadow in my shot. So you kind of again start going, oh, I bought this amazing expensive piece of equipment and now I need to buy more expensive equipment to make it work. But it really is a lifesaver being able to see in a bright sunshine day with a bright screen. So yeah, it's one of those things.
Ollie, do you want to talk a bit about your airport contract with Air New Zealand? Like, that's a pretty amazing, unique kind of position you found yourself. And
yeah, it wasn't with Air New Zealand. That's the national carrier, like Qantas is for yous fellas. In New Zealand, no, my contract was with the Auckland Airport.
Auckland Airport,
so they own the land, they own the runway, they manage everything. And basically it started with me about 10 years ago, going out and photographing once a month for the new digital newsletter that they were putting out back in 2009. And they said, we've got a budget of $250 if you come out and spend half a day with us. And I was like, there's no way that's actually worth it, but there could be an opportunity here. So I did that for about 6 months. And in the process of doing that, was able to build a relationship with the marketing team. And then when they said, oh, we need a photographer to do this other thing, and I was able to say, yeah, I'm $2,000 a day, thanks. And that's sort of how it worked. And I just worked more and more over the years, to a point where in about 2014 or 15, I said to them, I've spent about 5,000 of your dollars standing in line waiting for a temporary pass. Why don't you get me a permanent pass? And then I can just go and do what I need to do without you having to hold my hand. And they went away and thought about it for 5 minutes and came back and said, great idea, here's a permanent pass. And that allowed me to go out anywhere on the airport grounds and pull my camera out and start taking photos. And then I went to them and said, well, now that I've got this pass, you should use me more often. So how about I give you a big discount on my daily rate if you use me a certain number of days a month? And so they signed me up to 8 days a month for about $1,200 a day. So it was a pretty lucrative contract. Ended up being worth more than $100,000 a year. And then COVID came along and said, thou shalt not. And so it went to zero overnight. But it was great because I got to do photography, I got to do video, I got to fly my drones. I even did some aerial mapping. I might show you that shortly, where it allowed me to sort of just really show them what I could do creatively, and that was beneficial to them. And I ended up working for multiple parts of the airport, not only marketing, but the property team and the development team of the new runway and the retail team. And it was really cool. It was a great job while it lasted.
Yeah, it'd be fantastic having that level of freedom as well, and having different projects that you can work on and that kind of thing as well. So
yeah,
awesome.
I will share you the screen if we still have time.
Yeah.
By that, I mean, I'm going
about sort of 10 or so minutes left.
Okay. So this is a website called Drone Deploy, and they're really cool for mapping and doing photos. So you can see the lighter image around the outside. That is the Google Maps image that a satellite has taken, and then the slightly grayer image in the middle, simply because I forgot to change my settings off the D-Log style photography. But this is what I shot. And so with the technology, I was able to drive out to this location with this map in mind. I had drawn a map over I don't even know if it shows you the map. I can't remember. Once it's shot, I can't remember how you do that. But anyway, but the cool thing about the software is it then takes the, 500 images that it took, literally with the camera facing straight down for most of them, and then it takes a fly around the perimeter looking on a 45-degree angle. And then it allows you to, it stitches all of those photos together in a orthomosaic, I think it was called, which allows me then to zoom in. And as I zoom in, the quality improves. and then I can zoom in again and the quality will improve
Oh,
again.
wow.
And you can just look around at the number of pebbles that there are, or the guttering. Maybe we need to replace this guttering. And that's super cool for quality and just sheer image size. I mean, the detail there in that roof, it just
What
shows
sort of
you.
height do you fly when you do that, Ollie? Is it 60 meters or?
You're starting to ask some difficult questions. It's not really that high. I think I was probably 40 meters.
Okay, because the lower, I guess, the lower you are, the better resolution you end up with.
The better resolution, yeah. And if you're willing to push it to zoom into this sort of level, it's a little bit pixelated, but you can still make out most of the data, and that allows you to really, for them, it's a gutter inspection, it's a roof health inspection check. You could use it for insurance purposes and all that. But now that I've taken those two-dimensional photos looking straight down, I can now allow their software to create a three-dimensional model out of that, and you can move around and see their entire property. So this probably took about an hour and a half to photograph, and then probably 12 hours for their system to render. But it allows me to show them a view of their site that they may not otherwise have, and you can zoom right in. And yeah, it gets a little bit smurfy around the edges when you come in this close, but you can say, look, we're really concerned about this building, and we want to look at it in three-dimensional space. We want to come up with ideas. We can import this into another three-dimensional CAD software. I mean, that quality is pretty good, eh? Like it's pretty
impressive.
That's
a subscription service, Drone Deploy as well?
Yeah, Drone Deploy's subscription. It's quite expensive. It's about $200 US a month, which is not cheap. But if I can turn that into, if we stop having these stupid lockdowns, then I can turn that into some really interesting stuff. Cropping. So you can, I can't remember where it is, but you can actually measure. So there were 688 photos that made up this entire model. And yeah, the map quality is quite good, thanks. Details. So yeah, you can actually take measurements. So if we go back to the map, we can do a volumetric measurement of this building because we were quite concerned about it, or maybe that building there. So we just draw a little map around it. And because it's got the three-dimensional data, it can go away and figure out that that's 88 square meters of land that I've just drawn out there, and that the material volume is 185.3 square meters, cubic meters. So that's pretty fantastic product to be able to offer. All I'm doing is I open Drone Deploy on the computer at home. I go to the map, I look up the address, I see where the bounds of the property are. I draw lines around it. I tell it I want it to map it. I can choose the height. I can choose, all sorts of different things. When I get to site, I open up the Drone Deploy app and push fly, and it literally controls the craft. I do nothing. It takes off. It flies to waypoint 1. It flies for as long as the battery lasts. Then it flies home and lands. I turn it off, change batteries, turn it on again, push resume, and it goes back to where it finished and keeps going.
Wow.
And I sit there checking out Facebook the whole time. Of course I don't. I'm a responsible drone pilot. I am constantly in view of my craft. But at the same time, it's so hands-off. It's easy, and you can then give your client something they can take to their insurance company. I mean, this is a massive bottling plant. They make it's called Allied Liquor. So they have all sorts of different liquor stuff going on, and I'm sure they'd like to be able to prove to their insurance company that they're looking after their fixtures and fittings or whatever. So
I had a job once, Ollie, where I had to come up with a system and test out a whole bunch of different cameras and lenses to be able to shoot the top telephone poles out of a helicopter.
Wow.
Because they needed to inspect, some of the fine connections, and to actually physically get a person to go up and climb every pole wasn't productive.
Yeah.
And so that was my first kind of application from my landscape aerial photography skills to something a bit commercial. And I can well imagine that a drone's a much better way to do it than more cost effective.
Yeah, for sure.
They've got special inspection drones, don't they? They're actually designed to do that kind of work.
Yep.
the enterprise sort of drones. So
Yeah, you can have those big drone, eight blades, and they have special cameras, and you can have farming cameras that will take infrared pictures of your crops and tell you where you need to put more fertilizer and all sorts of stuff. They said the same thing about these tanks here. They said that every year they have to go out and do an inspection, and it takes 3 people 4 days to go through these tanks and do all their checks. When in fact, if I was able to provide this once a year, they'd be able to do it a lot quicker. So look at that! Whoa, over there.
Yeah, what are the other applications of drones that you see happening now that people are probably less aware of and progressing into the future? Because I can see.
Well, I mean, there's this sort of mapping technology, which is great. You could take this 3-dimensional map and add it to Google Maps so that you could get your business looking fantastic. But then there's the agricultural side of things, where you can go out and map your crops. You can map the health of the plants, where the soil needs the most water, all sorts of different cameras you can get to install under these drones. They use them in firefighting. They can fly drones into a house on fire or an area of bush. They can go looking for people. You can put infrared cameras on them and look for people. There's all sorts of different applications. I know that the police are using this technology here of mapping. When there's a serious crash, they'll close the road off, they'll stick a drone up. In 20 minutes, they've got all the data they need. They open the road up again. They clean up the site, they open the road up. They've got everything. Whereas before, it used to take hours of photography and note-taking and this, that, and the other. Whereas now they can capture these scenes and all of the detail that you could ever want. You can measure down to a 1/10 of a centimeter, depending on how high you fly. And it's these sorts of technologies will make things much easier. Of course, you then go conspiracy theory and say, yes, now you're going to use them for war and we're going to use them to spy on people. That's probably coming as well. Who knows? But there are a lot of new applications that drones will open up possibilities for.
Yeah, I would have suggested that that's where a lot of this technology came from in the first place. Like most things, Ollie, is the military minds and funding and background. But I don't like to spend too much time thinking about that. And there's the sort of privacy sort of element as well, which is always floating around conversations around drones. I don't know if you have any thoughts around that.
Well, I know that the laws in New Zealand, where you're not allowed to fly over property unless you get special permission or you have to knock on doors. Like I had to photograph a school once, and the best way to see the school is on an oblique angle. If I fly over the school, I'm not really seeing much. But for me to fly at 45 degrees of the school, I'm flying over 750 houses. Well, try doing a mail drop to that neighborhood. That's just totally like, thank you, red tapers. That's great. However, there's a rule that you can't fly over private property. That is a safety rule. It's not a privacy rule. In fact, the CAA couldn't care less about privacy, but they are all about the safety of the airspace and the people on the ground because of the airspace. And I think it's a really key distinction to make, because the reason I'm not flying over your property isn't because I can see you getting changed, because I can't. The stock standard camera that comes on these drones is so wide that I need to be about 3 feet in front of you to recognize your face. So there's no way I'm looking in your bedroom window. But, the great unwashed look at the news and go, a drone crashed and a drone is flying near my house, therefore it's going to crash and therefore I'm in danger and you're probably looking at me getting changed and therefore I hate you. And it's just all, it's just hate rhetoric, and it's so stupid. And yet it drives people's feelings about the whole industry. So it's really important, if you fly a drone and you crash, don't post your video. And it's also really important to knock on houses and say, hey, look, I'm just going to be flying my drone over your house. And as long as you knock on enough houses, you usually don't piss people off.
Well, it's been great to get an insight into how you apply all that technology, and I guess how long have you actually been flying drones? And I guess for 5 years or more then?
I'd say that my first year was either late 2014 or early 2015.
Yeah.
So by the time I flew in America, I'd had several months of playing. But looking back now, I really was a novice. But at the time, I was confident, and because I had the aptitude because of gaming earlier on, I could understand three-dimensional space when I was facing the wrong way, and that's a real key thing. Is when you take off and then you turn around and look at you've then got to flip your controls in your head. And some people get it straight away, some people can learn it, and some people just will never understand. They have to hold the map the right way up, otherwise they can't read the map. And that's fine. So you've just got to try harder when you're like that to make sure that you don't, because if you're flying towards yourself and you're going to hit a tree, you need to know which way you're going to turn. Or if a kid runs out in front of you, you don't want to hit them, and you go the wrong way, you can make it worse. So it is a skill, and you need to practice, and don't ever underestimate how much that hurts when it hits you.
That's it. We're probably running sort of to the end of the show now. Just wondering if you had any anything like if people want to look at your work or find out more about what it is that you do and see maybe some more of your films, where they can go.
Okay, so recently WordPress did an update, and they pushed that update to my website, and my website broke. So right now my website's being rebuilt. My website is virtuallyfamous.co.nz. So if you wanted to check me out at some point in the future, go to that. However, if you wanted to look at more of those family films, echofilms.co.nz is still up and running, and there's a few examples on there of the way I look at that. And I must give a shout out. It was actually someone we invited. I don't think they're an AIPP member, but there was an Australian photographer who came to an NZIPP event and showed her work of family videos that made me almost cry. And I suddenly realized how important my family is to me and how little video I had of them. And then I thought, well, now I want to make videos for other people. And then someone said, how much is that going to cost? And I was like, oh, $1,000 or $2,000 or $3,000. And they're like, yeah, but what if we can't afford that? And then I started thinking about, well, how do I give it to people who can't afford it? And so Echo Films is a project where if you buy one is given away to someone who could never afford it, or who's hasn't ever thought of it, or you could just give it away as a gift. So for every one that's bought, two are made, and that's that idea of an echo where your family might want a video, but you can have an effect on someone else's family by buying a video for yourself, and we'll give it away to someone else. So it's quite a cool project. It's unfortunate that it's come in just on lockdown, but it's something I want to work on more in the future, because I really do love the idea of capturing kids and families and even grown-ups as they are right now, because in 5 or 10 years, they're completely different people.
Yeah, and it's precious memories captured, and having it in video, I think, means so much more than having it in another way than just the still image. So great work there. Thank you so much for your time tonight. It's been a pleasure to have you on and hear about your work and your film, and also staying up that extra bit later than we are here as well.
It's 11:30 in Aotearoa, folks.
That's all right.
Yeah.
And Ollie's a family man too, so he won't get to sleep in too often, I don't imagine.
That's all right.
Like teenagers probably aren't getting up as early.
Yeah.
So Ollie, I guess for me, one of the things, even though we've got this talking landscape photography sort of show going, I felt like, in terms of somebody, like I said, reiterating, going back to the beginning of the show, in terms of someone who's spending time with someone like yourself who's so forward thinking and progressive and innovative and front edge, I think is a nice sort of ripple effect to all of us, I guess, to sort of wake up to being a little bit more innovative, a little bit more creative, and a little bit more thoughtful, I guess, with the tools that we have in our hands. Like pretty much every camera these days has a capacity for video, and we're surrounded by the people we love. So you sort of got me sitting there straight away going, geez, what more can I be doing for my family and the people I care about? And I had no idea the Echo Project had that beautiful sort of sentiment, for what really is pretty heartfelt. And during this time of COVID, that was my next question. I won't ask you now, but was what you feel like is the silver lining, I guess, in COVID, or the way you've adapted. And I think, and I'll probably sign it off myself with that, is that the clarity and focus of family, and the importance of genuine, real relationships, and slowing down, which is another element you talked about in terms of the way you film, that is sort of pervading through our lives a lot more. We've just had this unspoken opportunity to slow down that I guess a lot of us have been craving for, or weren't even consciously aware of how lacking it was in our lives. And we've been gifted that back, and video is one of those ways to capture that stillness and those slow magical things so beautifully. And you know, just flip the switch on the back of your camera and get your family and neighbors around, and or slow down a bit in the landscape and think about the movement of those clouds in a different way. Or
well, that's right. I mean, we've already got the camera sitting there on the tripod. All you really have to do is just flip it into movie mode, and sometimes you don't even have to do that. Just press the record button and have all these beautiful snippets of the beautiful natural world that we're seeing every time we go out there as well.
And then you might get lucky and get jobs to go to Micronesia like Ollie.
Yes.
I didn't get to ask the story behind that one. Maybe next time, Ollie.
Maybe next time. Yeah, that's a really cool story. Just one more thing. Look up timescapes.org. That's
right.
That's the one with all the landscape time-lapse photography.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen that stuff, do look it up. Look at the trailers. Look at any of the snippets that are on YouTube. It is, for landscape photographers, it's like every frame is a landscape photo that's beautiful, and yet he runs them all together to make a movie. So it's quite beautiful.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. All right. Well, thanks once again, Ollie. It's been a real pleasure, and we'll see everybody again next week. Till then, good night.
All right, love to the family, Ollie.
Thanks,
See
man.
you. Bye.